Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong and Linode. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead of us, but first I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of today's session or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live webinar today. If you have any questions for our panel members, we want you to direct those to the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. That's also where you're going to find the chat tab, and we want you to engage with your fellow audience members. Let us know your thoughts throughout today's discussion. If you check out our handouts tab, you will see there's a PDF uploaded there to accompany today's webinar, so please download that at your own leisure. And at the conclusion of this webinar, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. So our topic today is, will your cloud provider become your competitor? The fear is real. And leading our discussion today is our very own Charlene O'Hanlon, Chief Operating Officer here at Techstrong Group and Editor-at-Large for Techstrong Media. Thank you all for joining us today, but Charlene, how about you take it away from here?
Thank you, Cody. I'm very, very excited to be here because I actually used to do what Cody did all the time. So it's nice to be back on this side of things. So thank you very much, Cody, for that great introduction. And I do want to thank everybody for joining me today. We have an amazing webinar lineup. We've got a great conversation based on some research that was done by Techstrong TV, or Techstrong Research Group, I should say. The webinar today at its core is really about multi-cloud and the diversification of cloud environments. That's the focus. And throughout, we will be looking at that, as well as some topics that are related to multi-cloud, including the level of multi-cloud adoption and some ways in which organizations are using multi-cloud in their infrastructures and applications. We'll also discuss the emerging threat of cloud providers becoming competition and the rise of alternative cloud services, as well as whatever else may crop up along the way. It's going to be a great conversation. Some of the discussion, as I said, will be the result of research from Techstrong Research, and we are so very lucky to have Dan Kirsch, who is the managing director and co-founder of Techstrong Research, who's going to discuss with us some of the key findings from the recent report. After that, we'll hear from Luke Seelenbinder, who is the co-founder of Stadia Maps, and Ruben Stranders, who is the co-founder and CTO at FireServiceRota. Both of whom are going to share their fascinating journeys using multi-cloud. Along the way, we'll be getting some color commentary from Blair Lyon, who is the Vice President of Cloud Experience at Linode, which sponsored the report. So before I turn things over to Dan, I do want to remind the audience that we do want this to be a conversation that includes not only us here on the screen, but you as well. So please do, if you've got a question or a comment, utilize the chat box there on your interface. Cody described it to you. Please do use that. I will be checking the chat messages and the questions tab throughout so that we can get you as involved in the conversation as possible. Certainly want to make sure that you walk away with the information that you're looking for on today's webinar. So with that, I actually want to turn things over to Dan now, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the report, some of the findings, and then after that, like I said, we'll move on to Luke and Ruben and Blair.
Thanks, Charlene. So during first quarter of this year, specifically February and March of this year, we ran a survey to find out what our audience's feelings were around DevOps and the public cloud. So we had more than 500 participants across more than 20 industries. Participants ranged from all over the globe. We had participation from 60 countries, which is great. About half of the participants work at smaller companies under 500 employees, while a quarter are at companies with more than 10,000 employees. So all sorts of different companies. The audience is really focused on DevOps, cloud native development, digital transformation, and security. So I might kick it off with, Charlene mentioned multi-clouds, but kick it off with one of our initial findings, which was 68% of participants are using more than one cloud, which some may find surprising. Some people say multi-cloud is sort of a fad or it's going away, but my feeling is the multi-cloud is here to stay. And when we asked, why might you add an additional cloud provider to your ecosystem? IT environments are already complicated. Why further complicate it? About 55% said we need to be less reliant on one or two clouds. Charlene, do you want to introduce Ruben and Luke?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I thought you had a couple more things you wanted to go through. I apologize for that. Yeah, so Dan, that's a really, really fascinating research report there and a statistic. But, it's really, I think when we're talking about multi-cloud, it would be really interesting to hear, kind of put the rubber to the road, if you will, and see how organizations are using multi-cloud environments. So as I said before, I do want to introduce Luke Seelenbinder, who's the co-founder of Stadia Maps, and Ruben Stranders, who's the co-founder and CTO at FireServiceRota. And I would love to hear, gentlemen, both of your stories related to what your decisions were regarding how to set up your environment, whether, how you guys decided to move to multi-cloud, things like that. But first, tell me about your technology, and then we'll dive into why you decided to make some of the decisions that you did. So, Luke, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about Stadia Maps, what you guys are about, and what folks need to know about it?
Sure. Thanks, Charlene. So Stadia Maps is a map API company for developers. We basically allow developers to put maps in their applications, whether that's a web application, a mobile application, or perhaps even a server application, because we offer some APIs that are used for routing and navigation, things along those lines. And our journey really started as a result of a major cloud provider changing their pricing scheme. About 5 years ago, Google Maps increased their prices about 10x. My co-founder and I were developers at the time, and we had a mutual client who saw a page with not too many views in a month, and they were paying nothing, and their price was going to go up to about $1,000 a month. And we saw an opportunity to start something new, to start a company that was focused on just sensible pricing, on reliable service, on really a fast performance, but again, without going to the crazy extremes of pricing that would sometimes be required to shave every last millisecond off. And we found that when you offer people like that human touch, that actual support, similar to what many of the alternative cloud providers will give you, it really works. And that's kind of how we got into multi-cloud as well, because we had to be very pragmatic to offer a very competitive product. We picked the provider that made the most sense. We picked, for instance, Linode, because they did not charge egress fees for most of the situations we needed cloud providing for, so servers for. So, and then we chose one solution for DNS and one solution for many other things. So that's kind of how we came along to multi-cloud.
Excellent. That's I love the fact that you saw a market and you addressed it. So that's great stuff. Ruben, what about your company? Can you tell us a little bit about your technology and perhaps why you decided to kind of go in the direction with multi-cloud that you did?
Yeah, sure, Charlene, and thanks for having me. So unlike Luke, we are in a very strong small niche. Our company specializes in scheduling and alerting for firefighters. We are mainly present in Europe. And yeah, we have a long history going back to 2006. My co-founder, a good friend of mine, he joined during his high school. He worked for a music store, and the owner was a firefighter. So they started building together a small project, which started from a hobby project to something larger and larger and larger. And it became a professional company in 2013. Our journey is long, and it goes from PHP to dedicated hardware that resides somewhere in a data center that we owned to Linode in 2014 because we wanted more flexibility, we wanted more resiliency, redundancy, and for us that is really one of the most important considerations. We need security, we need availability, we need resiliency and redundancy all over the place. So this is our main concern, and this is why we are in multiple data centers of Linode and have as a standby also a different cloud provider. This is a crucial thing for us. Our customers rely on us 24/7 and rely on us to protect their communities.
That's really I want to emphasize what you just said, Ruben. That's the fact that your customers really rely on us. It's a mission critical operation, right? There is no downtime that you can tolerate or your customers can tolerate. So I imagine having a multi-cloud environment has kind of helped you have that level of uptime that your customers quite literally demand.
Indeed. Demand, and I would say deserve. I feel that emergency services, firefighters in particular, are underserved by the technology sector. And we give them the tools that they need to allow for flexibility in their personal lives. A lot of them are volunteers, and the reliability. You asked me about our tech stack. For us, it's a lot of Kubernetes, a lot of open source, things that are portable from one data center to another, from one supplier to another if we have to. This is for us absolutely crucial to be able to have this flexibility and provide the service levels of 24/7, 365 days a year.
That's great. Now, Blair, I certainly don't want to leave you out of the conversation. So I invite you to join in at any time. And actually, one of the questions that I did have for you was, where do we see kind of the alternative cloud provider landscape right now? I mean, do you see, in your conversations with customers and such, are they kind of clamoring for an environment that really does offer them a level of flexibility that maybe one of the quote unquote big three cloud service providers don't offer? Or what are some of the things that they are asking for that with a cloud, an alternative provider?
Yeah, Charlene. I mean, it's interesting. It's really refreshing to hear Ruben and Luke's story because it's very reminiscent of a lot of our customers. I would say about 70% of our business customers are using multiple cloud providers, using Linode and combinations of others, and for many of the reasons that we've already heard, whether it's redundancy, failover, they want to be able to have additional availability zones in certain regions that they're looking for. And so they may be able to combine providers together. Some of the other factors might be cost optimization. Typically, the alternative cloud providers are about a third or half the price of some of the big providers. So cost optimization plays a role. We also hear it when it comes to things like support. They're looking for higher touch, more direct access, be able to pick up the phone, and not incur any charges, and just be able to talk to somebody. But it's been interesting, I would say, although, like a Linode's been around since 2003. I mean, DigitalOcean is another alternative cloud provider. They've been around for well over 12 years now. Even OVH Cloud in Europe has been around since 1999, I believe. So although we've been around a long time, I would say only really until the last several years have, us and others sort of fallen into this new category of alternative cloud, where we've been able to check enough of those boxes. We've had things like what Ruben's talked about. He's needed Kubernetes capability, containerization, had enough regions in key spots around the world, had the necessary hardware to be able to provide the performance on that Luke talked about. So it's only until recently, I would say, last couple of years, have we been sort of viable alternatives to the big three. But still, it's all about fit. and you really need to kind of pick and choose where it makes sense for you. And I think with this multi-cloud trend and things that have been happening, especially over the last 3 to 5 years, it's a kind of this wonderful opportunity for choice, portability, being cloud agnostic, having more ownership by using open source tools and other third-party tools between your applications and the cloud providers. So it gives you a lot more flexibility, and it's becoming easier and easier to do that. So it's an exciting time, and we're seeing it, from some of the data that Dan uncovered in his research.
Yeah, I would actually love to hear some more of that data, but
yeah. So one area I know, Luke, you mentioned costs, but I'm sure Ruben, costs creep up for you too. And obviously, the cloud isn't free, and it can be very expensive. And so when I work with end users and various organizations, oftentimes they architect their workloads based on the way a cloud charges. So cloud A might have a certain billing structure, and you're going to optimize your workload for that billing structure. It makes it hard, portability difficult, because you go to another cloud provider and they bill in a different way. Additionally, cloud vendors change the way they charge. So you might architect your workload for a specific billing method, and then all the billing method changes, and you're sitting there holding the bag. So one question we asked was, why might add an additional cloud infrastructure provider? About 38% of participants said the costs are too expensive or too complex. So wondering if you guys can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely probably the number one thing we look at when we look at who to choose for a particular project, is what's it going to cost, because we run a very tight ship, and if we see costs go wildly out of line, then we're going to not be able to pay ourselves salaries that month, or something extreme like that potentially. So we look very closely at is this cost going to scale badly if it's more successful than we expect.
Mm-hmm.
We operate on a model where we don't charge overage fees, which is very nice for our customers, because it's often the case that they might have a one page that's super successful for one day of the year, and we don't think it's fair to just charge an extra $1,000 that month simply because they had one day of a large amount of overages. But on the other hand, if our cloud provider treats us where if we have one crazy day, we're going to have that $1,000 come on us, we can't really make that we won't make a profit that way. So we really look at the cost and how they scale relative to our workloads. So for us, it's all about, are we getting charged for egress bandwidth? Is that going to scale wildly? Are we going to pay 8 cents a gigabyte, or 12 cents a gigabyte, or 16 cents a gigabyte? Or are we going to pay zero relative to the amount of compute we purchase? So that's really what I look at, is how does the pricing scale relative to how our workload scales? And when we find a match, which we have found in Linode mostly, we're really excited, because then we can offer a great product at a really consistent price, and we sleep well at night because we know we're not going to wake up to a $10,000 bill.
Yeah, for us, it's a little different. I mean, I don't want to wake up to bad performance, or our customers complaining about slow alerting times, or other critical processes not working performantly. For us, the main driver is performance, reliability, and our capacity management policy is basically scale 50% above a bad day. And a bad day could be a very, very stormy day in the Netherlands, in Europe, in Denmark, where we suddenly see a large influx of the number of incidents. And we want to be prepared for this. Just like our customers, we care less about the cost of our equipment or the hardware, and more about being ready for that bad day. That's why we don't even rely on auto scaling. For us, that is not fast enough. We just have usually 30 to 40% of overcapacity, which is running maybe some other jobs about contract or payroll processing, something that is not that urgent. but we do want to be ready, and we do want to have that performance for unexpected situations.
That makes sense. I mean, it coincides with, one of the findings is 2/3 of participants said that 99.99% uptime is critical. That being said, what I thought was interesting is disaster recovery and backup was actually fairly low on the priority list of selecting a cloud vendor. My hypothesis is that customers feel like disaster recovery backup is a joint effort. You can't totally rely on your cloud vendor for backup and disaster recovery. Do you guys have any feelings on that? Agree, disagree?
I completely agree. We have looked into providers for databases, for Redis, for other particular parts of backup. This was never sufficient. They pick up the phone. They promise to pick up the phone in 15 minutes. That is not sufficient for us. So we decided to have all of this within our team, all this knowledge within our team, and we build this on top of Linode's infrastructure. So we have redundant databases, we have redundant Redis, we have a redundant warm standby in different data centers, and we do not rely on any type of databases offered by any cloud, and that includes Linode. I know that Linode is now offering managed databases. I haven't really looked into it, but we have looked into various other providers, and it's simply not sufficient for us.
I think we actually take somewhat of a different approach to that, and it's simply because the data we deal with is not critical data. Basically, all of our core services are provided from OpenStreetMap data, which we can download tonight and get it all and get it back up within a reasonable time frame. So we're not so much focused on reliability of that data, because that data is always going to be there, but we're focused on reliability of service. And so because of that, we actually are up until recently, we were in every single one of Linode's data centers. We ran a point of presence in every single one of them. We have our main compute clusters spread around the world in 3 different regions. And so we've optimized for kind of a graceful failover situation where really if 1 data center goes down, we're fine. If 2 go down, we're fine. If 3 go down, well, if it's the right 3, we might be in trouble. But at that point, then I think Linode's going to be doing a lot of work for us too, trying to get those data centers back up. So we've optimized for the fact that if we spread our services around the world, we'll most likely always be up, and we don't have to worry about the backup so much because the data is not as critical.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think a lot of people got nervous with AWS outages towards the end of 2021 and didn't realize how dependent their workloads were on. So they thought they were dispersed in different data centers, but they were actually really reliant on certain services from certain data centers, and so they had failover, but it wasn't totally independent. Have you guys been sort of rethinking your approach since a number of well-publicized outages, or you feel like you've got a strong failover approach as it is?
I think it can always be better. We are happy with our current failover policies, and also our customers have their own failovers even on top of ours. But yeah, I am conscious of this, and that outages are definitely not independent. So we plan our infrastructure across multiple countries, and we are about to do this also for multiple cloud services to ensure that these outages are independent.
I would agree with Ruben. It's all about, like, we've done this from the beginning, really. Like, since we launched, we were in multiple data centers, so it's just kind of been core part of our value proposition and a core part of our culture of engineering.
Yeah, about a third. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say about a third of the participants said that recent cloud service provider outages is sparking them to rethink their approach and possibly adding another cloud provider.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charlene.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great segue, because I was going to ask Luke and Ruben if there were any incidents in particular that kind of made you guys rethink your current strategy and maybe move on to an alternative cloud provider. I mean, was it simply cost, or was it, did you have issues with with performance, or was it something altogether different? Luke?
We launched on Linode, so and since then we've branched out a little bit to other alternative clouds as workloads and cost made more sense. But for our core usage, we found that it's just the perfect balance of performance and price and reliability. So
yeah, I can't agree more. When we started using the cloud in 2013, there was not really a lot of alternatives. So we also started with Linode, and we have looked into multiple times. For example, Linode was a little late with Kubernetes, so we did look at other providers. But when we compared cost benefit, we decided to wait, and that decision paid off.
Just one of the other things we can point out too is when it comes to thinking about sort of these failover or redundant strategies with multiple cloud providers, one of the benefits of alternative providers like Linode and some of the others that I mentioned is that we try and keep it really simple on the pricing. So typically we charge the same across every data center. So if you are trying to do a configuration like Luke articulated, it's very satisfying to know that your prices are going to remain the same if you go to different configurations across different data centers. If you go with the hyperscalers, sometimes those prices can be dramatically different. So it makes it more difficult to sort of do these kinds of strategies.
I like the fact that it's very predictable and simple. That is why I would prefer Linode over, for example, AWS or Google, in addition to what I just mentioned about cost benefit. And I must add there that cost is not a very important consideration. It's more redundancy and reliability. And yet, if I look at sometimes the complexity and the specificity of the specificness of the solutions that are provided by AWS or Google, it's fairly complicated. And I think if you engineer your solutions towards those clouds, you quickly get into a situation, or at least that is what I think, of vendor lock-in, and that is what we want to prevent at all costs. We want to be able to quickly move from one provider to another, as long as they have vanilla Kubernetes. I'm good with this.
Dan, do you have any research on the the ability to whether organizations are looking at that, the ability to move from one cloud service to provider to another, and that not getting locked into a particular cloud service provider? Is there any research in there that talks about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely seeing a trend in businesses not wanting to be so reliant on their cloud vendor. So they're looking at cloud providers who support open source standards. Of course, there's only eventually you're going to be locked into a certain flavor of that open source potentially, but the more you use, what I've seen and what the report fleshes out is the more that you start using the capabilities of a cloud provider, you get more and more locked in as you use more and more of the proprietary hooks of a provider.
Yeah, I think we're hearing more and more over, on our sites, DevOps.com and Container Journal, that there are more organizations that are looking to kind of break free from that proprietary environment to utilize more open source strategies, obviously, but also to be able to move to alternative cloud providers and in multi-cloud environments, just because at the end of the day, they don't want to be left hanging if something happens with that cloud provider, whether whether there's an outage or whether there's a new pricing structure that they just cannot handle anymore. So it seems to be a growing trend. And Blair, I'm interested in hearing what Linode is seeing, from kind of the major reasons why organizations are looking to alternative cloud providers, and then whether that seems to be kind of jiving with what Dan has found with his research.
Well, yeah, I mean, and there are quite a few different things. So we've touched on quite a few of them, whether it's multi-cloud or whether it's price predictability, being able to have more control and flexibility and avoiding things like vendor lock-in. And when it comes to alternative cloud, it's kind of the core covenants are typically much better price, simpler approach to cloud infrastructure, not having those hundreds of services, but really the core 20 or so that you need to do 90% of most workloads. And then that kind of high touch customer support experience. So those are sort of the key draws on that most companies have. And so it's usually a pretty good fit, as we've heard from Ruben and Luke, for most people. But it's not the end all be all either. There is a reason why AWS and some of the hyperscale providers are amazing. Some of the things they can do and the scale that they can provide is incredible. And there are times when you need that level of complexity or customization control that you may not be able to get with an alternative cloud provider. So I wouldn't say that it's a perfect fit for everybody, but what's really nice right now is that there's more option and choice and more control being put in the hands of the developer rather than in the hands of the cloud provider. And I think that future is a really good one.
I absolutely agree with Blair. I can provide a little color here because I'm also a platform engineer consultant with basically a hyperscale startup. And what they want to do is build solutions today that can scale 10x, 100x, 1000x, maybe not 1000x, but 100x tomorrow. And we don't want to spend the time today, the engineering hours, because engineering hours are very expensive, to engineer that scale, because AWS or Google Cloud has already done that for us. They've already provided the engineering infrastructure and the engineering hours to make that work. So I think it's very much the difference is where you want the company to go. Do you want to go 10x to 100x very quickly, or do you want to grow in a much more sustainable path over a longer time frame? So it's more about time frame reference, and it's not that one is bad and one is good. It's that it's just two different approaches, and it just depends on how you want the company to kind of what the growth cycle of your company should be.
So I do want to quickly remind the audience that we want you guys involved in the conversation. So please do, if you've had any experience with either the big threes or alternative cloud providers that you'd like to share with us, please go ahead and use the chat box and put it on in there. As well as any questions that you might have regarding what Luke and Ruben have done with their businesses with relation to multi-cloud and alternative cloud. Anything maybe that Blair might be able to answer for you regarding alternative cloud. Certainly whatever Dan can provide, because he's a font of information when it comes to multi-cloud. So please don't be shy, guys. We really would like to get you guys involved as well. And speaking of Dan, let's kind of move on to this idea of a cloud provider becoming a competitor. What's that all about?
Yeah, so sort of the elephant in the room. It's the name of the webinar. So are you afraid that your cloud provider will become a competitor? And so we asked respondents, are you afraid that your cloud provider will become a competitor? So 49% said no, which is relatively low. 23.5% said yes. And surprisingly to me, 27.5% said they already are. So the classic examples are, Walmart isn't going to want to build on top of AWS. A technology company isn't necessarily going to want to build on top of Google or Azure if they're competitive. But I think it goes deeper than that. There's also each of those cloud vendors has huge partner ecosystems. So, our partners who are also customers nervous about their cloud partners becoming competitors. So let's say you are a security vendor offering services through one of the major hyperscalers. Are you nervous that the hyperscaler is going to get into your business and sort of carve you out? So another couple questions we asked, or some findings, was about 20% said that they are nervous that their cloud provider might steal their IP, which is huge. I mean, that's 1 in 5 participants. And this was an interesting finding. About 18% of respondents said that their cloud providers' customers have morals or a business model they don't agree with. So there's a lot of distrust and about cloud providers, and whether it's a competitive threat, they might steal IP. They don't believe in the way business is done. So there's a lot of distrust in this area where cloud providers are really the backbone of many businesses, yet the customers don't trust them.
That's a really fascinating set of findings there, and I've heard about some organizations deciding that they did not want to work with a particular cloud service provider because of either the politics involved or how they run their business with regards to sustainability, any number of reasons. I don't know that I've heard in my conversations of organizations not wanting to work with a larger cloud provider because they thought they were going to steal their IP. That's a big one. And that actually brings up questions regarding the security of data that is stored in the cloud. And obviously that has been a large topic of conversation, especially over the last couple of years. Is this something that is becoming more of a conversation among alternative cloud providers as well? Blair, has the security question kind of come up in your conversations with organizations about the use of alternative cloud providers?
Well, I mean, I think there's two pieces. The first is kind of what Dan was talking about. Is for sure that is a main drive, a pretty big driver for those where it's an issue. Right. When it comes to being competitive, worrying about maybe their open source project being forked and then monetized, or their data being repurposed without their permission and monetized. So there's lots of those concerns, which are fair in that these businesses, these large hyperscalers, have dozens, if not hundreds, of other businesses, many of which are competing or soon will be competing with probably your company. And that is a real and present danger that folks have, and I think that's one of the things that's helped propelling multi-cloud, it's helped propelling doing kind of taking this sort of open source perspective to some of the tooling, which I think is great, and it's real. I mean, it's something that I think everyone needs to sort of consider. Is it a factor for me? Is it something I see in the future? Is it something I need to be careful about? And that's really where I think alternative cloud providers can play a role. I mean, that's all that we do. We don't have other ancillary businesses. We only sell cloud infrastructure. We don't have, we don't sell shoes. We don't sell groceries. We don't sell books, launch rockets to the moon. We don't do any of that kind of stuff. We just sell affordable and accessible cloud computing. And that's really all that we want to do. So I think that goes into your calculus. Whether it's something that's really critical for you, you'll have to sort of decide. And then the other part, I think your question is about security, and security is by far the number one topic that everybody wants to talk about. And it's a broad topic. Are you talking about the actual cloud provider security, or are you talking about your own security or your application security? You're talking about fending off things like DDoS attacks and bot traffic and so on. There's a broad, ransomware, all kinds of things. So there's a broad range of topics around security, and that is something that our customers really want to talk about. And that's, of course, what we're excited, working with Akamai and their tremendous security capabilities, is because delivering content over the internet, takes a combination of capabilities. You need to have, of course, the ability to put it somewhere and build on it, and then you have to deploy it into the internet, and then you have to be able to try and get it to the edge or cache it or get it out to where it's going to be as high performant as possible. It has the lowest latency you can, and they're going to need to secure it and do that really well. So you'll see, I think, a lot more cloud providers like Linode and others kind of bringing these combinations together so that you can kind of do an end-to-end sort of pure play capability and sort of control as much of that as possible. But security is a big deal and a big area that everybody wants to talk about, and it's something that we want to try and provide where it's appropriate, and then also make it easy to use open source and other tooling where it's appropriate also, so that you can kind of have the best of both worlds, and also we can kind of try and keep our, at least from our side, our attack surface and our tooling as simple and as focused as possible to make it easy for our customers to keep their content secure.
Great. So, Luke, I'd like to kind of bring you back into the conversation, because I know that this is probably a topic that's kind of near and dear to your heart, because you actually can't use any of the big three because they are direct competitors to you in your technology.
Yeah, that's right. So we started the company because one of the big three changed their pricing scheme, and they were kind of the elephant in the room, and still are to a large extent. And the other two have either had or recently launched mapping services. And add to that, all the big three charge quite high egress bandwidth fees. And when we look at with that, it just doesn't work. So this is definitely it's a difficult question to answer, because we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of engineering work we wouldn't have had to do if we were on a hyperscaler.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were on one of them, we would have always had that in the back of our mind. How does this work? We are competitors. You're selling us infrastructure, but we're trying to keep you from selling services. And we've seen this story happen a lot, where a company will create an open source project, they'll release it, they'll offer a hosted service version, and then a couple years later it gets forked by their own infrastructure provider, and it ends up becoming a direct competitor to their service. So for us, it's been all about, okay, how can we take this competition and kind of use it as the box we put around ourselves to say, okay, we can't do this. So how can we be innovative outside of this place that everyone tells you how to do everything or gives you like the provided services? Mm-hmm. And that's where we've really found our home in the alternative cloud, is we've been able to do things that other people didn't think about doing. We've built our own CDN on top of Linode. We would never do that in a hyperscaler because it's there for us. We just click a few buttons and it's there. But that's allowed us to actually have really good latency, because we can build all of our services into the exact same server, and it's right there, right next to the client. So in my mind, the direct competition has really been a positive for us. And I'm not too worried about the security aspect, about the IP stealing. Could it happen? Of course. I mean, it's part of life. People do things they shouldn't do, and as you scale organizations, you get bad actors inside of them. But I don't think that's so much of a big issue as just when you have conflicting competitive goals, then you start seeing pricing schemes that don't work. For instance, a hyperscaler could take our exact same infrastructure, use it, and they wouldn't have their own egress fees, so they could have a significantly higher profit margin than we do, because we have to have all the engineering efforts to make that work. Things like that is where the competitive aspect becomes really interesting to me.
Yeah, and then Ruben, I know you're not so concerned about the big hyperscalers getting into your business, but we've also talked about the idea of securing your data. So one interesting thing is about more than 75% of respondents said high data security is very important. But what's surprising is when people are evaluating services from different cloud vendors, security isn't one of the top differentiators. And I think when discussing clouds with various organizations, they sort of view it as every cloud has their own approach to security, but there isn't a single cloud that's inherently more secure or less secure. They all just have a certain approach to security, and then you're also responsible for security. So how do you guys approach security?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Actually, there are a couple of points that I was listening to the conversation, and a couple of points I will react, but I'll respond to your question first. Yeah, I don't think there is a big difference between the cloud providers in terms of security, although I don't have any data to back this up. Security is our responsibility. That is how I see it, and we have this obligation towards our customers. So we are about to be ISO 27K certified. We look for ISO 27K when we select providers. I know that you have it. I know that the data centers where you run have ISO 27K certification. So these things are really important to us. But I strongly feel that in a life-critical, time-critical domain where we operate, security is the responsibility of the company itself. And of course, selecting the right provider. And that was my other point. We were talking about stealing IP. Yeah, that's not something that I believe is a real risk for us. We are in a strong niche, and instead of doing one thing well, which I don't think any company can survive doing that, we do 1,000 things well. So maybe you can copy that one thing, but the other 999, which is very deep knowledge of the customer's domain, having good account management, having good customer support, customer success, going above and beyond, meeting the customer face to face. So yeah, what I wanted to get at was selecting a provider based on values. We have this idea of we're trying to do good. We are not in a domain where there exists a lot of money. The money that we receive is usually through tenders, and this is taxpayer money. Ultimately, our customers are not companies, which means that the people that are in our team, but also management and my fellow co-founder, we look at how much good are we doing in this world. And then if you look at certain providers, then yeah, I mean, you can have this argument of, well, the founder of this company cares more about getting into space than perhaps serving their customers or their employees. That is a consideration. And with Linode, I have a great account manager. We have talked multiple times also with customer support. We feel that Linode understands what we're trying to do, and we're not just one number on a very, very, very big balance sheet where we don't really matter. And perhaps we still don't really matter in terms of financials, but we do feel that we matter. And I have the same experience with other providers, big and small. So we do select them for matching culture and values.
That's great. I love to hear that. I think that is so important. And I don't think enough organizations give credence to the way that their customers view them and potential customers view them. So I love the fact that you really do make a lot of your decisions based on the values of that company. So that's great to hear. Dan, we are about, I would say, 12 minutes until the end of the webinar. So are there any other research findings that you want to go over before we kind of open it up or kind of talk about maybe some lessons learned working in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about these big hypervisors quite a bit, and so one piece of data is that it's no longer a no-brainer to go with one of these big, huge cloud vendors. So they still command a huge market presence, but when taken together, we consider alternative cloud to include. I'm not going to read them all, but a number of vendors, 8 in total. And when taken together, we asked participants, what clouds are you using? Are you using AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, IBM, a number of others? Over 15% said that they are using an alternative cloud provider. So that's a huge number. It's not sort of this niche thing where, oh, this DevOps team in one division is using a different cloud and everyone else is using a big hyperscaler. We're actually seeing that this alternative cloud market is growing, and it's growing for a number of reasons that we've discussed today. So whether it's pricing complexity, the platform complexity, whether there's competitive issues. And so that's sort of my big takeaway, is that this alternative cloud market is big and growing, and it's worth evaluating the capabilities of various providers in the alternative cloud market.
I think the market has grown to the point where it really behooves an organization to look beyond the immediate and really do the research, because obviously with greater competition, there's going to be greater savings to be had, and you, as the consumer, you have more choice. You have more flexibility to, and you have more of the decision making process. It's not one of three. You've got 12, 15, right?
Yeah, and what's also interesting is, years ago, 10 years ago or so, actually wrote Hybrid Cloud for Dummies and Cloud for Dummies, and it used to be, go to AWS, you pull out your credit card, and it's easy to get started. That's the same for everyone now. I mean, it's not a big secret that only AWS you can pull out your credit card. In fact, many providers, I know Linode as well, you don't even need to pull out your credit card. You can just get started for free. They'll give you credits. So it's easy to get started with any of these cloud providers. And in some instances, it's actually easier to get started with the alternative cloud providers, because they're using the platforms you're familiar with. It's not proprietary, and it's just interfaces that a developer is used to seeing.
So last few minutes, I want to kind of turn things back over to Luke and Ruben and talk about maybe some of the lessons that you've learned along the way, maybe some things that would be worthwhile to let other folks know about if they're looking into alternative clouds. I don't want to call them gotchas, but certainly some, maybe more of like a, oh, smack my head moment. What I wish I'd thought about that, or I wish I'd known that before. Luke, again, why don't we start with you and see if you've got anything that you want to, some wisdom to impart, if you will.
Perhaps I do. I think that the top thing we've done that's enabled us to actually use multi-cloud is automate it. Tools like Terraform, Ansible, things like that really allow you to stitch together all the clouds, and suddenly you see it as code. You see your infrastructure as code, and you can test it if you want to. It's very easy to deploy. It's very automatable, and you get to a point where, yes, you know who the provider you're using is, but you're also able to stitch all the different services together. Like we actually use AWS DNS. It's the best thing we could find, but we back it all with Linode servers mostly, and that's a tool that's made a lot of the gotchas just go away, because you don't accidentally click the wrong button in the cloud panel, the cloud dashboard. It's just all in code, and you can see what's actually changed. Another gotcha is everything's not one-to-one. Servers are not one-to-one, even if their core count's the same, the RAM's the same, the gigahertz is the same. There's a lot of variance between different cloud providers. So running benchmarks, getting an understanding for, okay, this provider gives you a dedicated server, and it might get slowed down because you hit a heat limit or something like that. Like something benign as that might end up impacting whether that cost-benefit analysis actually works for you or against you, or whether your services are fast enough. So actually doing that work of benchmarking. And then at the end of the day, I think that finding a few providers that you have a track record with, that you have built a trust with, that you can call, you can email, you can get support if you need it, is really what I always come back to is my provider reliable? And if I have 2 or 3 providers that are 100% reliable, that fix my problems when I have them, that help me build a company that works, that's what I see the benefit of kind of this mix and match is that at the end of the day, you have a business that's sustainable, you have a business that's profitable and is productive.
Excellent. Great points.
Yeah, I mean, many points that Luke made, I can completely reinforce. It is very important to do those benchmarks because gigahertz, RAM, and CPU cores, they don't mean much. You can see a wide range between different providers and even within providers. I have had some conversations with Linode. It was a couple of years ago. They had some different processors out there, and we had a preference for some. So sometimes we were just cycling them until we got the ones that we wanted. That was a while ago. Will we see the difference with other providers? Yeah, absolutely. A core at Google isn't the same as a core at AWS or a core at Linode. So for sure, do your own research. Do some experiments before you scale up and out. Infrastructure as code, absolutely extremely important. We automate pretty much everything. Use your servers as what they say as cattle, not as pets. If something doesn't work, throw it away and replace it with something else that does work. Don't even look for the root cause because it's just easier to replace an entire Kubernetes cluster than to do specific fault detection. Monitoring is another very important one for us. Monitor a lot of different things, have them in good dashboards, put alerting on that. Again, also infrastructure as code, also alerts are code. Whom to alert in those cases is code. And I believe find something and find a provider that links in and supports your way of doing business, your culture, because there is a lot of options out there. If you do find a provider with whom you have a good click and test it out, test their support, test if you can get someone on the phone, even though you're still a small player. If you have big plans, it is important to build that human connection. We do that as well. And I think perhaps finally, and this is also a strategy of ours, select best in breed. Don't go with one party for everything, or at least that's not my preference. It's also not our customer's preference. We focus on planning and alerting, while others focus on taking the 911 calls. These are different expertises, different domains. And yeah, it all connects together. So look for providers who have this openness, but select the pieces from the different providers that do what they should do, and keep looking out for what else is there in the market.
All right, great. Well, we are about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately we are out of time. I'm going to turn things back over to Cody to do his closing housekeeping items, but I do want to thank Ruben and Luke and Blair and Dan. All of you guys gave us so much information in today's webinar. I do appreciate your time and your expertise. And with that, Cody, over to you.
Thank you, Charlene. I'd like to quickly remind our audience that today's session was recorded. You can watch it on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. You should also be receiving an email shortly with a link to access that recording. So we do have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give away. Our first winner is Bonnie B. Our second winner is Lou A. Our third winner is Anil R. Our fourth and final winner is Marcus M. So congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. And if you don't see an email, just check your spam folder. But Blair, Luke, Ruben, and Charlene, and Dan, thank you so much for being with me today. I would like to thank Linode for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks, as always, goes to you, our audience. We really appreciate you sticking around with us for the full hour. We do just ask for one extra moment of your time to fill out a quick post-webinar survey that should pop up on your screen here in a moment. But other than that, we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning webinar. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.